Hey there, thank you for tuning into DuckBricks. I'm Chris, and today we ask the ultimate question: what if Bionicle Generation One never ended? To answer this, I've recruited Bionicle sage and lore master KhingK, who you may know from his excellent series of 3D modeled masks ranging from stuff that we never saw in canon to things that we did see but only in an organic or mutated form. But that's not all he's good at, because KhingK has an encyclopedic knowledge of Bionicle lore and has spent hours pondering this very question, and as such he's the perfect person to discuss this with. We'll be approaching this question from two major points. Number one, if Bionicle continued as a set and storyline into 2010, what kinds of sets would we have gotten and what kinds of stories would we have seen? And number two, had the story serials not been abruptly concluded, where was the Bionicle story as a whole going? What was Velika's endgame going to be? What was the point of Mirendar? We'll discuss all of this and more in this very in-depth episode of Constraction Conversations. Thank you all for tuning in, and let's get started.
I think the best way to start this off for people who may not be familiar with exactly why Bionicle ended at the time that it did, maybe you could give a quick rundown of at least your perspective on this, the history that you do know as to why Bionicle ended in the first place, and kind of where the theme was supposed to go had it not have ended. Just some rough outlines to start things off.
I believe it was Lego's decision to actually stop the Bionicle continuation around 2008. That's when they were trying to do the big reveal of the whole robot and whatnot. Lego started to try to distance themselves from Bionicle. If you look at 2009 and 2010, we get completely different sets. You know, we get the Glatorians and the Agori, like those were kind of like offshoots from the Bionicle storyline. So they tried to introduce a new setting, a new kind of building system. And I believe at around 2009, 2010, that's when they were starting to transition out of Bionicle, when they were just starting to really get away from the theme, I think, in 2008.
Right, I mean, I believe Greg Farshtey himself even said that he wasn't even ready for Bionicle to end. He tried to convince the Lego group that it still had a few more years left in it before they made the big reveal, but they were telling him to wrap it up. They weren't really interested in continuing it too much anymore, and of course there's a number of reasons that kind of factor into this. Obviously there were the brittle pieces that were really affecting the quality of the sets, and overall I think the biggest thing was that it was getting really difficult for new fans to join the theme, and you could only really understand what was going on if you had been following the story of the books and the comics and whatnot all throughout basically the beginning of the run. And what I do think that LEGO has learned their lesson from this is that obviously now when they're doing long-run action themes like, say, Ninjago, they're covering every single thing in a TV show and they're continually bringing back old stuff to make people kind of remember what came before. They also have this mandate in Ninjago that you really can't reference anything super significant from the past storylines. Tommy Anderson, who basically is the guy in charge of Ninjago, has said this many times on Twitter that they really do not like to reference too many deep things from Ninjago's past in order to not let it confuse new viewers. That's why stuff like, if you're a Ninjago fan, the whole Mr. E being Echo Zane was cancelled because people thought that they wouldn't recognize them and whatnot. And I do think that this is both a good and a bad thing for themes like Ninjago or Bionicle. They're two very different themes, but Ninjago obviously has reached its 10th year, there are new fans coming in every day, and it's still understandable because you can watch the entire show right available on Netflix, at least in the US. For Bionicle, not only was the story split into a ton of different media like the serials and the books and whatnot, but there wasn't even one place where you could watch all of the story beginning to end, because obviously they didn't have a TV show. So I think a combination of all of these things were what caused Bionicle to eventually end around 2008. What I am kind of curious about, though, is that if they knew by 2008 that they were going to just wrap up the story and call it good, I even wonder why Barra Magna and 09 being the soft reboot is even there in the first place, because it seems a little counterintuitive to soft reboot your line after you already know it's going to end. But maybe this was already planned too long in advance and they just decided to release that one wave and call it good.
I think it was also the fact that they were trying to do some sort of transition, but at the same time, maybe they were still trying to see if it was still marketable. From what I've heard things about how they were going to have a new setting. You know, they were going to bring everyone to that new jungle moon of Bota Magna and have those bionicle dinosaurs and all these different things. They were going to have a 5th movie that was like planned. And I think by the time 2009 came around and they tried this new kind of thing, they were like, yeah, Bionicle's fate is sealed. We're going to have to close it off. They were trying very hard to see if they can get like a new audience in that can appreciate this kind of toy line. And it was getting hard because you also had inflation. You know, the prices of these sets, they were increasing, and the number of pieces were decreasing. There was a lot of things going on, and I do kind of believe that 2009 was Lego's way of actually trying to draw in the new audience, like the new people. But unfortunately, that didn't really work, because not only did it not really attract the new people, it also deterred a lot of the old ones too. A lot of the old fans, they're like, you know, why did you remove the mask functionality? These characters don't even have elemental powers. You know, who are these characters? You know, like why should we care about these characters? They're not Toa. They're just guys that go around in the middle of the desert. You know, Mad Max Bionicle edition. You know.
Oh yeah, it certainly was a very strange choice, and yeah, I definitely could see them trying to get in new fans with this, but honestly I think it really wasn't the best idea because, as you said, not only did they not draw in new fans, but they also severely alienated the old fans. But I guess we can now kind of move into the first part of the main discussion here, which is, if it did not end, where was the story going? And I know you mentioned the 5th movie and the completely different setting and dinosaurs and whatnot. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that, and we can kind of get into that whole topic and really just present to people who are not aware of this as to where the 2010 Bionicle story was supposed to go.
I heard rumors that the Element Lords were going to be sets. They were going to be like Bionicle dinosaurs in the Bota Magna theme. I don't know Velika and Miranda. I think those are mostly for the story. But for the Element Lords and the dinosaurs, I think they did have an idea of making them sets. Mostly because this is off of a canceled Bionicle movie number 5 kind of script that was released. And basically what the story was going to tell was that all of the characters in The Legend Reborn, they were going to be in a volcano, and they were going to be launched from that volcano to actually get to Bota Magna, interestingly enough. So they basically rocketed towards the planet so that they're able to get onto the planet. And the Element Lords, they do appear in that script. So I thought that was very interesting because it basically gives you an idea of where they were trying to go for, where they were, I guess they were switching different environments for basically every year, similarly to how they were doing it in the earlier years of Bionicle.
Yeah.
So I think it was a very interesting it was an interesting movie script to read, and I think if the Clitorians sold really well, I think that was probably going to be the next thing they were going to go for.
Right, and the really interesting thing set-wise is that movie 5 was actually only supposed to cover really just half of the story for 2010. The movie actually ends on the cliffhanger of them being launched from the volcano into Bota Magna, and they turn and hear some roars of the biomechanical dinosaurs, but most of the movie was still set on Bota Magna, where they were fighting against Tuma still, except this time Tuma had allied himself with the Element Lords. And this script treatment specifically states that Kina's armor and weapon had changed. I'm guessing the same applies for, say, Mananui and Akar. They probably would have gotten upgraded sets. And of course we would have gotten the Element Lords as sets as well, probably the canister-sized villains for this wave. And then perhaps maybe in the second half of the year we would have actually gone into the whole Bota Magna storyline and gotten some of the biomechanical dinosaurs. I know the set designers have stated that the Pharaoh and Skirmix set, which was the lizard-like creature that was being ridden by the Bone Hunters in Barra Magna, was kind of the proof of concept or prototype of these dinosaurs, so they honestly probably would have looked very, very similar to that set, but it's kind of interesting to see the direction that these sets were going had the Glatorian have sold really well, which unfortunately they did not. I can't help but think that just hearing these concepts of very elemental characters, element lords, and biomechanical dinosaurs, I don't know, maybe that would have been a better start and a better setting than what we got with the Glatorian, because I'm just imagining the Ignika crash landing on Boda Magna instead, and the first thing you see are just dinosaurs roaming around. You could have maybe some elemental villagers and whatnot, but it would be mostly dinosaurs and element lords, and I feel like that would have been potentially a more interesting setting for a lot of people, because if I remember correctly, back in 2009, a lot of original Bionicle fans were kind of turned off by the whole post-apocalyptic setting. They didn't really like the desert or the all just barren sands, so I don't know, maybe Boda Magna would have been a better location at least to launch the soft reboot of Bionicle.
Yeah, it was it's literally barren,
Yeah.
barren Bear Magna. Yep.
Oh yeah, and while I guess that the kind of general outline for the story is basically what we can see online, it's pretty clear where exactly that story was going to go. Obviously, it didn't go that way. We ended at the fourth movie and the final wrap-up of the Journey's End type storyline, but then the story serials still continued, and I think that's a much more interesting thing story-wise to kind of investigate where exactly these story serials were going. So maybe you can speak a little bit towards that and generally where you think that each of the individual plot lines and threads that Greg was seeding was actually going to go.
We could start off with actually talking about the serials and see where they were ending up with. So the unfinished serials are what's going to give us an idea of what's going on. I believe there are two serials that were unfinished. There was the Yesterday Quest and the Powers That Be. Both of these serials were going to be focusing on a lot of different aspects of the Bionicle lore that's more obscure, particularly, the Red Star, the Great Beings. You also have the Merendar. You also have the Golden Skinned Being. A lot of these different things were going to be introduced in these serials, and Greg was kind of going for a story that focuses on how two different communities try to merge together, try to integrate with one another. Because at the time of around the ending of G1, they were really focused on this idea of, we have these Agori, you have these Glatorians, and then you have these Matoran universe inhabitants. You have these Toa, Matoran, Taraga, and the rest. How are these two going to integrate with one another? Because there was a big question of artificial intelligence around this story. And I thought that was very interesting of what Greg was trying to go for, because it was as if Greg was trying to really hit on that idea of what exactly happens when robots in real life, what will happen if these robots become more intelligent? What if they start having their own consciousness, And there's some moral questions that are related to this subject, because at this time, if you have a robot that is as intelligent as a human or has a consciousness like a human, do you treat them the same? Are they equals, or are they going to be treated as creations because they were built from machinery? So I think that was really the direction that G1 was trying to go for. It's definitely some really deep stuff, some deep philosophical stuff. And of course, probably something that, I don't know, like an average kid wouldn't really dive into much. But it was very interesting, because this is what's the whole premise behind Velika's motives and what he was trying to go for in this new world that was being formed.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Velika, because he's always been a character that really fascinated me, because, well, first of all, his story was never finished, but it was clear that Greg was kind of going for this artificial intelligence aspect of him, where his motivations were very different from Pterodac's. He wasn't trying to conquer the world or take all the power for himself. He was trying to essentially right a wrong that he perceived about these artificially intelligent beings gaining sentience. And he's essentially saying that since he was one of the beings that created them, then it is in his right to enslave them. Because he made them, he can do what he wants. And of course, now that they've evolved past being just creations, that's where the whole conflict comes between Velika and the rest of the Matoran universe inhabitants. So maybe you can expound a little bit more around Velika's motivations, his beliefs, and possibly what the endgame was. Because obviously, as the villain, he would not have won. I think we know that one for sure, but maybe expound a little bit more in terms of where his story was going and what was really the point of having a villain with motivations like his.
So what I did was that I basically went through a lot of Greg's answers in an attempt to kind of figure out and piece together what exactly was he going for in terms of Velika. And I think what's very interesting is the first thing to point out is that Velika is the reason why all of the Matoran universe inhabitants even have a free will to begin with. What I did was that I basically went through a lot of Greg's answers in an attempt to kind of figure out and piece together what exactly was he going for in terms of Velika. And I think what's very interesting is the first thing to point out is that Velika is the reason why all of the Matoran universe inhabitants even have a free will to begin with. So the main reason why they all have a consciousness and everything, it was because of Velika. And Velika was the one who actually created that during the very early years of when the Matoran universe was starting to flourish. And that I thought was very interesting, because what he actually did was that he was the reason why the whole Bionicle timeline even existed. He is the reason why all of the events that happened, the Baraki trying to overthrow the Great Spirit, Pterodac's trying to take over the Matoran universe, all of these different events are all tied back to what Velika did at the very beginning of the universe, because he basically decided that, you know, what if I give these guys sapience, if I give them true sapience? And that's what he did. And in a way, it was kind of like his way of saying, yeah, I'm gonna cause all of these issues with what my other brothers did with this robot, and later on they might become something useful for me. And that's the thing. The whole story of Bionicle unfolded because of that one decision of basically giving them the free will. And when those inhabitants started actually reaching the planet of Spherus Magna, when they started going on the planet of Spherus Magna, Velika saw the results of everything. He saw what had happened, you know, in the present all the way down to, you know, 100,000 years ago, and he came to this realization that my brothers were too weak when it came to this core war that caused the planet to shatter. They were too passive, and therefore I need to put a firmer grip on everything. I need to basically show my power over all of these people so that they can obey me and that they can be ruled and in an orderly fashion. And that's what Velika was intending to go for. It's very interesting because he gave them sentience in the first place, but his decision to give them sentience was kind of like a way for him to actually control these people. It was a way to sort of, I guess, make these characters more, you know, diverse with all their personalities and whatnot. But it was a way to control them, because interestingly enough, he was actually planning to use that as a reason into why they should obey him, into why they should follow him. It's as if he gave them a gift. I have given you the gift of free will. and you should serve me as a return, you know.
And that whole concept of what free will actually means was really where the Bionicle storyline was going to, especially with a character like Velika. That's what's super fascinating to me, because it's one of those rare times where even if you may not necessarily agree with it, you can kind of see where the villain's motivations are coming from, wherein he does have a semblance of a point that without him, these would be just robots. It would be just robots following commands. And of course, there were some selfish reasons behind that too. Velika wanted to have power, he wanted to have people to rule over, and it's no fun ruling over an army of robots who will just already follow your exact command. So he almost had the notion that by giving them free will and them still choosing to serve me, that means that I am above my brothers, I am above my fellow great beings, and most certainly I'm above these creations that I have chosen to give sentience to. And that's what's so interesting about his character, because the argument can definitely be made that since he created them, he programmed them to have sentience, to have a semblance of free will, that he has the control over what they need to do because he was their creator. And that's what's really kind of getting down to the core concept of what do you believe in terms of machines gaining sentience, gaining the human-like quality, what sets it apart, and what is that factor that determines that a machine is as close as possible to a human to be basically considered human, and where do the rights change based on that?
Yeah, and I think that was the main thing he was really trying to go for, because if he was to, let's say, if he was really to not give them that free will, I mean, it wouldn't feel the same. It wouldn't really feel the same in terms of I'm just ruling over these just robots.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just ruling over these robots. But if they chose him, if they really did choose him out of free will, that was more satisfying to him, because Velika's a narcissist.
Yeah.
He really believed that, yeah, they're going to follow me if they listen to my words, and if they're not going to follow me, I will remove them. I will eliminate them. And that's kind of the thing that he was really trying to go for. And what's very fascinating is that he has a contrast to Pterodax, mostly because Velika is not actually like a bad villain. He's not like a villain that kind of Pterodax is, you know, all the evil kind of villain that's just, you know, is in your nightmares and everything.
Yeah.
Velika is a different kind of villain. He's a villain that wants to correct a mistake that was made in the past. He wanted to correct a mistake through his own means, and he was willing to give others a chance to follow him. And if they decide to not follow him, then yeah, of course he'll kill them. But he wants to have people to join him, to join his side. I believe I read one of Greg's answers, and it was discussing about what would Velika do if he was to meet any of his brothers, the other great beings that are involved. And he said that, and Greg said that he was going to offer them a chance to join his side. Velika was willing to offer a chance for the other great beings to join his side, and to really accept his words that, yeah, you guys need a firmer grip on this planet. If you don't agree with that, then I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to kill you. So.
And Velika definitely could be convincing. I could see quite a few great beings of this. I mean, if you look at the original purpose of the Madanui, or Great Spirit robot, obviously that didn't happen because of several unruly characters in the Bionicle universe causing mayhem. You've got the League of Six Kingdoms doing an uprising, being put down by the Brotherhood of Makuta, and then the Brotherhood realizing themselves that, hey, we're the only ones stopping Madanui from being overthrown. Why don't we just take the power for ourselves? And that's what they did. And they sent Madanui into a great slumber. And that's obviously where we got our whole 10 years of the Bionicle storyline being focused around that. Almost a microcosm of a conflict within this much larger world that was all just happening inside of the massive Great Spirit robot. And yeah, the argument could be made that the Agori and the Gotorian could have been in a better place if, say, the Great Spirit Robot was able to finish its task on time and wasn't delayed significantly by almost by thousands of years, really, because of all these characters causing problems and causing uprisings because of their free will. So Velika definitely could have made the very strong argument that yes, they did need a stronger hand. They needed someone to be in charge of them. But of course, he's neglecting to mention the fact that he in fact was the one that gave them sentience, and he's really only doing it for himself because he enjoys having people choose to follow him. And that's what makes him such an interesting villain. It's that his motivations kind of started out in maybe not the right way, but at least in a way that you could kind of see his argument and it makes sense. But then once you really dive deeper into his character, that's where it starts to kind of fall apart in that regard. The other thing that's kind of interesting about Velika's beliefs is that obviously he does believe that they need a stronger hand, but he's not above kind of embellishing the problem or making it seem like more of a problem than it actually is just to gain people's support. Obviously, his plan was involving killing people in very gruesome ways, especially Karzani. He specifically killed him and left his body, making it seem that he was killed by Lezovic with his air sword. And then Tren Krom, of course, Velika took him from his prison and then very brutally murdered him in Boda Magna, specifically to make it appear that someone else from the Matoran universe was doing these killings. So then he could swoop in and say, hey, look, we need to quell these usurpers, we need to quell these kind of savages who are going around just killing each other very brutally and in very gruesome ways, just to inspire the fear amongst the population to be more accepting of him as a ruler and positioning himself as the right person for the job of quelling this. So he definitely wasn't above kind of staging these own things just to give himself more power, but his core motivation almost came from something that is semi-justifiable.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And another thing that I did find that was pretty interesting was that Greg actually did dive into what exactly would happen if Velika won, if Velika actually succeeded in taking over the society. And what he basically, how he explained it was that it was very reminiscent of the book 1984.
Yeah.
Where Velika would actually become a father figure, and that all of these Matoran and Agori, they would be kind of like his children, and they would obey him because, you know, father knows best. Fathers know best, and you just have to listen to whatever Velika says, and he will tell you what is best for you, and that's exactly what was going on. Velika really wanted to become a very strong and kind of it's a basically a fascist society.
Yeah.
So that was really what he was going for, and yeah, it really paints a dark future for this community, for all of these Spherus Magna inhabitants.
And that's a fascinating concept in and of itself. I mean, that kind of whole thematic 1984 type Orwellian vibe was really kind of touched upon and heavily hinted at in the Metru Nui storyline, especially with the Vahi and the Vahi animations for sure, was really kind of leading into that. So I would have been kind of interested to see where that story was going and exactly how far Velika would have gotten before he was defeated eventually by the heroes of the story. But I guess that was just kind of one direction that the story was going. But on the other hand, we had all sorts of other stuff going on. We had the Golden Skin Being, we had Merendar, and I'm kind of curious as to how much these would have even intersected, if at all, and if there are other ways that the story might have gone, including these factors as well.
Yeah, so from what Greg talked about, he imagined Merendar as being something similar to the Sentinel from X-Men. So basically a machine that was able to adapt itself and resist all of these Toa powers, and it has its own like specialized weaponry to get rid of Toa. I believe he brought this kind of Merendar machine to kind of give many of the different characters, like many of the Toa characters that were on the planet, like a new threat of some kind.
Right,
like
something to do.
Yeah, like how do you defeat something that is specifically made to defeat
you.
Toa?
Yeah.
So that was something that I feel like Greg was really diving into, is the fact that okay, we have all these different villains from 2001, 2002, 2003. You have the Buraq, you have the Rahi, you have the Paraka, you have the Baraki, all these different things. What if we give them a bad guy that was specifically made to kill Toa? And that's where Merendar comes in. Now, the thing is that Merenda was not actually part of Velika's plan. From what Greg seems to tell is that Velika didn't need Merendar to carry out his plan. In a sense, Merendar was kind of like a tool. He's kind of like a tool that's just there. And in the story, I mean, he was a failsafe. He was a failsafe against these Toa if these Toa were to ever become a threat or whatnot. It's kind of like the same thing as if you were to have a robot, if you were to build a robot, and for some reason that robot became rebellious.
Yes,
and
you build
wanted
another robot to kill it.
and wanted to kill you. So we build another robot to kill that robot.
But who will kill Merendar?
Who will kill Miranda? We don't know. We don't know.
I also know there's a rumor out there, and obviously this hasn't been confirmed by anything, but if you go back to the original LEGO Hero Factory animations, there was actually a winning entry of a mock contest, actually made by one of the members of TTV, who are now famously running the canonization contests, but there was a massive robot that was kind of nicknamed Silver. It was a big robot that Stormer and Von Ness faced off against. And I think that was actually supposed to be Merendar because that was made for a storyline competition to depict a mystery Bionicle character. And that one was the picked winner out of all the different entries to depict a mystery Bionicle character. But then obviously, when the whole story serials wound up, the whole story serial aspect of the theme wrapped up, and when they weren't really trying to continue the story or really publish anything new related to it, especially around 2010, 2011, that was when they decided to swoop in and say, hey, well, this build could work for Hero Factory, couldn't it? And that's kind of interesting to me, how that apparently was supposed to be Merendar's canon depiction, but just missed it by a little bit.
Yeah, I actually heard those rumors. Yeah, though I believe that it was supposed to be for Merendar. I believe so. But the thing is that once Bionicle was kind of tossed out the window, it was repurposed for something else. Personally, I'm not a fan of that design.
Yeah.
For Merendar, I mean, it's very imposing and whatnot, but at the same time, I wasn't really much of a fan of that kind of creation if it was to become Merendar. And also another thing is that Greg seemed to also confirm the size of Merendar in his answers. He said that Merendar is just a little bit bigger than a Toa or Glatorian. So it seems like we're talking about some sort of being that is just slightly taller than a Toa or a Glatorian. Kind of like an assassin robot of some kind. Also, Merendar is biomechanical. He's not fully robotic. That was also another thing that was very interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's a really cool mock. I just don't know if it necessarily fits Merendar. I, for one, am just happy that TTV is actually doing a canonization contest for Merendar, so we can actually get the basically perfect build for him that's been voted by the community. So I'm very, very excited for that one because I have really no idea what Merendar is even supposed to look like besides the very, very sparse description that he was given in the Bionicle story serials. So I'm quite excited for that contest, and I definitely will be reviewing the build for Merendar when it comes out. But I guess with that, we can probably move away from Merendar and start taking a look at some of the other stuff. I know that there's tons of other content to get through that was cancelled or in progress. For instance, the big one, speaking of the canonization contest, is the Golden Skin Being, but then of course we have the whole zombies on a starship kind of storyline centering around the Red Star.
Oh yeah. So the Red Star is a very interesting setting. And the thing about the Red Star is that it's very strange. It's a very, very strange setting for Greg to kind of bring up because you have Lacan, for example, Taraga Lacan. You know, at the end of 2004 movie, he dies, but all of a sudden now he's back somehow. What happened to his sacrifice? You know, he didn't permanently die, and now he's back on the Red Star. You know, and I thought it was very strange, and I started diving a little bit into a lot of Greg's answers about the Red Star. The Red Star's purpose is basically to transfer the body of a deceased Matoran universe inhabitant into the space station to basically have their consciousness transferred to a new body or have their body repaired so that they can return to the robot to continue doing whatever. And I mean, I thought that was a very interesting concept. At the same time, it also brought in a lot of different questions about, you know, what does it mean to really die in the Matoran universe, you know? Like, unless you are shot with a disintegration spear or you're crushed by Kitangu's arms.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You're probably going to come back through the Red Star.
It makes sense from a technical perspective. Like, if you're making a robot that's made to do certain things, obviously if something breaks in it, you want to have a thing to fix it. But if you kind of look at it through the lens of like, these are sentient beings, now death means nothing, that's where it kind of falls apart to me personally.
Oh yeah, and that's where it definitely really feels very awkward. And another thing that was very awkward was Greg tried to tie in the story of the Red Star with an offshoot combiner that came from 2010. Gardas. Gardas.
No.
I don't know what was going on with Gardas. Like, that was just a weird combiner. It was like
what they could.
It was I mean, they tried really hard. I mean, it looked like Tahu kind of came together with General Grievous or something.
Yeah.
It was very, very strange, and they kept trying to make the story of, yeah, this is the combiner that was responsible for the teleporter on the Red Star to break down. That's why you never see any revived beings back in the Matoran universe, is because, yeah, he's the guy responsible for breaking the teleporter, even though in the story he wasn't. And honestly, I don't blame the Kastora on the Red Star for accusing him, because he looks like a mess.
Yeah.
He's a complete mess. How do you repair something like that, you know?
They just gave up.
They just gave up. They just like and the thing is that he died multiple times.
Yeah.
Okay, here's something very strange, okay? So Gardas was mutated. He was mutated by the Ninra ghosts, and he wanted to exact revenge on all of the Ninra ghosts. Like, he wanted to slaughter them. But then he got killed. He gets teleported to the Red Star. He gets revived in a random location in the universe. And then he continues his killing spree.
And then gets killed again.
I'm not surprised on why the Kastora blamed him for the destruction of their teleporter, because my goodness, how do you deal with that kind of guy, you know?
Like, I don't know if that was supposed to be funny, or like it was just how he looked. I remember the funniest thing about that is that there was actually a contest, because when they first made Gardas, there was a contest and they were like, okay, you fans decide, what is this guy's backstory? And the winning entry was just someone who was like, he's the complete abomination. He never should have existed. He's just a monster that wreaks havoc. And that kind of just became his official story because of that contest. And that's what I find very funny about that guy.
Oh, man. And like I said, this guy had some real dedication. He had some real dedication, because when you get teleported after being revived on the Red Star, you get teleported to a random location.
Yeah.
So the guy was like, well, it's another day for another killing spree. And he just goes around in the Matoran universe trying to track down all of those Ninra ghost people and find them and kill them. It's so weird. When he actually does come into the story of the powers that be, they really had to give him like that backstory, and also kind of give him these teleportation powers that were very odd too, because
Yeah.
yeah, he has the ability to teleport to a place that he has been to before. That was the only reason why Kopaka and Pohatu were even able to get on the Red Star, is the fact that he had that ability to just teleport anywhere he has been to before.
Which is very convenient, I will say.
Yes, very convenient. And he just decides to drag them along. He was like, "Okay, here, you are on this weird space station with all these zombies. You guys take care." And he teleports out of there and just leaves Kopaka and Pohatu there to be with all the zombies. It's strange. Very, very strange.
So, we know that Greg is a big fan of comic books, and he draws a lot of his inspiration for Bionicle from comics. And I'm guessing that this whole zombie storyline came from most likely a comic he was reading and said, "Hey, that's a good story. I want to do that in Bionicle." My question is how any of this was remotely related to any of the other dozens of plot threads going on at the same time. What was his end goal, or what was his end game with this story? Was it to basically restore every dead character back to life? Was it so they could understand what death means and maybe tie it back to what Velika was doing? I have no idea what his end goal was with this story. Or was it just to have like a fun Toa escape zombies on a spaceship and live to tell the tale type story? I don't know.
I have a gut feeling it was probably the latter, where they wanted to tell a story about zombies on a space station. I think that was really what he was trying to go for.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what kind of direction he was trying to push this Red Star thing for. I really do not know. I looked at all of Greg's answers. Most of it was just like technical stuff. It was like, how does the Red Star work? Does it resurrect these beings? Does it resurrect that being? There wasn't that many questions in regards to where the story was kind of heading. It seems like Greg was kind of like, you know what? I think it'd be very interesting to put zombies on a space station, and he just went for that and kind of was like, I guess, do the story as he goes. And that's what he does with his stories. He doesn't really outline them for anything. He kind of just like says, "Oh, this sounds good. I'm going to add it here. This sounds good. I'm going to add it here." So there isn't really an outline for him. There isn't really an end goal for him.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, I will add this as I go and see where that goes. So that's what I felt like was going on with his story for the Red Star.
Right, and as you said, that was one of certainly the stranger aspects of these story serials. I'm not the biggest fan of how it was going, more specifically because of the whole death doesn't mean anything type concept, because, I mean, again, it does make sense in terms of a technical perspective, but I feel like there were other ways he could have explained it. What is a little bit more interesting, though, and a little bit more ambiguous than just a straight-up thriller zombies on a spaceship type storyline, is the golden skin being. To this day, I have no idea what that was even going to be. I don't know why he was creating it, what the endgame was. Obviously, he left it on a cliffhanger with the Toa Mari, who were our main heroes for 2 years, arguably 3 of the Bionicle story, just enthralled under its sway and under its control. So, obviously it was building to something big. I just don't know what, and maybe you could expound a little bit on that.
Yeah, the golden skinned being was also a very interesting case because, for one, the golden skinned being was the result of all the Paraga getting mixed together in a vat of energized protodermis, along with some other, vortex and Kreka species and whatnot. They were all mixed together in this one giant concoction, and the next thing you know, you emerge this giant golden skinned guy going around being able to fulfill dreams. Basically, what you have here is the Bionicle version of the Genie from Aladdin.
Yes.
He's going around fulfilling whatever kind of dreams you want, and he does it. He actually has no like moral code when it comes to that. He's just like,
He'll just do it.
he doesn't. Yeah, he's just like, if you got a dream, I can fulfill it for you if you want.
Like, no limit. Like, what are the limits on his powers? I don't even like know. Like, I don't
So
know. What happens if you wish conflicting things? I don't know how this works.
yeah, it's very strange. He seems to be a kind of person who would want to self-preserve himself, obviously. So there are some things where you can't really dream something where he dies or something like that. But for the most part, he seems to have the ability of granting basically whatever you want. The only thing that he cannot do is kind of bring a person back to life.
Yes.
And very interestingly enough, uh, there was actually a person who asked Greg about this whole notion, and they dived deeper into the idea of, is it possible for the great golden skinned being to bring the dead back to life? And Greg said no. However, it is possible that they could actually kind of like bring back an image of that person.
Oh.
They might have the same sort of mannerisms and personalities and whatnot, but that person is based off of what the dreamer would perceive that person to be.
Interesting.
So essentially what he's saying is that you can bring Matoro back to life, but he isn't Matoro. He's just an illusion, or like
What you
kind of
remember him to be.
yeah, how you remembered Matoro to be. He's not the real Matoro though, which is very interesting.
What I want to know is where all that was going, because obviously he has the Toamari essentially under his sway, and that's the last we see of him because the story serial's ended. Do you know anything about whether that was supposed to intersect with any of the other storylines going on at the same time? I know Greg doesn't have endgames for what he plans, but it feels like introducing such a significant, I guess, element into this storyline at such a late time. Or I'm sure he had some ideas as to why he wanted to bring a wish-granting being into existence. I just don't know what that was all for.
Yeah, so I do have some ideas of where he was probably going for based off of what Greg said. One of Greg's answers basically said that the great golden skinned being worked with a lot of the Skakti. And at the end of, I believe it was Samad's tale, he was trying to kind of like build a fortress of some kind. Based off of what Greg was going for, he said that the golden skinned being heavily relied on the Skakti, because the Skakti were the ones who were giving him the dreams. And the Skakti were dreaming about war and conquest, and it was something that the golden skinned being was trying to work towards. So I feel like that golden skinned being was probably going to go on a conquest of the planet in some fashion. Now, another thing that was very interesting was that Greg said if enough Agori, Matoran, and Toa actually come in and feed the golden-skinned being about dreams of life and prosperity and peace, that golden-skinned being has that ability to do so and could potentially make a better society for Sirius Magna.
I guess that must have been where it was going then. On one hand, it feels almost like a cop-out, like they didn't have to work for a better society, they just wished for it. I don't know. I feel, because like a lot of what Greg was doing was writing stories about these two very different groups of people trying to coexist and living together. And I feel like them just wishing for a better society and having it, for all intents and purposes, appear via magic with no real work seems a little counterintuitive to what he was trying to do with the story.
Yeah. And I don't think that was going to be the case. I think that was more so a hypothetical that was brought up to Greg in terms of what would happen if the golden-skinned being sided with the Toa and sided with the community.
Right.
But I think what was happening with the golden-skinned being was that, yeah, he was going to go on on a quest for conquest.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was just some weird things, you know. I mean, like at the end of the day, I kind of felt like the golden skin being was Greg's way of saying, you know what, this is how I want to get rid of the Paraka, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of get them. I mean, they were significant villains, but I'm just going to throw them in this, you know,
This
pot,
Yes.
this boiling pot and create this new being out of them. And that's what happened. So I don't know if we would ever see the Paraka again after what had happened with the golden skin being. So I don't know.
Right, and it's kind of a shame because that one was probably easily the least fleshed out of the final story ideas that was implemented for G1. It was really just introduced in the serial. There was one other serial that was going to address it, and then it was just all cut short. And at this point, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, we can piece together, as we just did from Greg's answers, as to what it was actually going for, but again, we don't know how this would have intersected with Velika, if it would have at all, because it seems like Velika was the new, essentially the big bad, or the main storyline, and then you've got all this other stuff on the side, which may or may not be related, so it's honestly a shame and it's hard to tell, although again, this is one of those characters that's getting a canon depiction in the canonization contest, so in any case, I am very excited to be able to build this one physically. It'll be a very, very interesting and imposing creature, for sure. But honestly, with that, I think that about sums up most of the really strong and main points. I know there were a few minor plot threads left dangling from the other serials that really weren't started right at the end of G1, but there were some that really never wrapped up or stuff that never quite finished, like, for example, the Shadowed One and whatnot. So maybe you can talk us through a little bit about those other plot lines that were left hanging and your idea as to where those were all going.
I believe another thing that was going to be incorporated somehow, but I don't think Greg focused too much on this one, was the Vahi, because the last time we ever saw the Vahi was that it was in the possession of Voporak, and that was something that was very interesting because during the Core War, during when the Great Beings were starting to build the robot, they only made two Konohi, the Legendary Mask of Creation and the Legendary Mask of Life. They only created those two legendary Konohi. They never created the Vahi.
Right.
And very interestingly enough, I think Greg answered this one time. It was the reason why they never created the Vahi was because they didn't have enough time.
That's ironic.
Funny enough.
Yeah.
Funny enough. Yeah. They didn't have enough time to do it. So,
but they would have if they did have enough time.
Yes. And actually, Greg answered this question too. He did say what the Great Beings would have done with the Vahi had they actually created it. If they were to create the Vahi, they would have used it as a way to address different aspects of the robot. For example, like if the robot was to have a critical malfunction, they could use the Vahi to slow the time around it so that the Matoran can work and do the repairs before they speed up the time again. I also find it very fascinating by the fact that this legendary Konohi came into existence through one of the Great Beings' creations. You know, Vakama was one of the Great Beings' creations.
Right.
The fact that their own creation was able to even make a legendary Konohi. I think that says a lot to where these characters were going towards. The fact that they were almost on the same level as the Great Beings in a sense.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That almost certainly would have tied into, I guess, the whole Velika storyline and
exactly
his as well. I like that.
Now, the thing is that from what Greg seemed to say, he did say that he wasn't going to have the Vahi show up later on in the storyline, and it was kind of like an offshoot also. Like, Voporak was able to get the Mask of Time, and then now we're like, you know, what does he do with it? Well, Voporak, he's going to try to bring it back to the Shadowed One so that the Shadowed One has this Vahi. And funny enough, I don't know, Greg did say that the Vahi would not show up, but at the same time, he also did say what the Shadowed One would have done with the Vahi had he got that mask. The mask was a source of power. the Shadow One could use as a bargaining chip too, as a way to just, you know, trade on things. The Shadow One was planning to form a new Dark Hunters and kind of bring in all the scum and villainy in the world to come together. It includes the Bone Hunters and also the Skrull that he was really trying to bring back. And I think, I don't know, at this point in the timeline, it was kind of unclear what he was planning to do next, because you know, the Pterodax is dead. Their whole plan to overthrow Pterodax, it was pointless, because, you know, now that the robot is, you know, not functioning anymore, what is he going to do next? Well, I guess for the Shadow One, his only other option is to rule Spherus Magna with all of the scum and villainy in the world. And I think that was what was really going on with the whole Spherus Magna arc. It was all of these different groups with different ideologies trying to fight over this entire planet and try to claim it as their new world.
And now I'm wondering how all of that would have intersected with all of the other dozens of plot threads that we just mentioned with Merendar and Velika, and if the Shadowed One was even going to interact with any of them. Has Greg ever said anything about the Shadowed One's fate or his destiny?
Greg actually did say that in one of the two serials, he was going to tell about the Shadowed One's fate, either in Yesterday Quest or the Powers That Be. I don't know which serial it is, but that's what Greg seemed to have claimed. He claims that, yeah, you're going to see his fate in either one of those serials, but you know, we never find out. So
yeah, and it's a shame. We probably never will see what actually happened to him, although it's probably simple enough to guess exactly where that was going. I mean, the last time that we saw him, he had just killed his most trusted right-hand man, Ancient. Of course, he didn't know that he was a secret agent for the Order of Matanui, so he made the right choice in killing Ancient, but in doing so, he kind of lost his only confidant. He lost the only person that really wouldn't betray him, or at least he believed wouldn't betray him. He kind of was on his own, and even with the Vahi, if Voparak had managed to deliver it to him, I don't know if he did. I don't know if he would have posed a significant threat to, say, the combined forces of the Glatorian and the Toa, and sure, he could have recruited some Bone Hunters and Skrull and, I don't know, leftover Skakti and whatnot, and probably formed some sort of a formidable force. I mean, a lot of the Dark Hunters are still alive, but I can definitely see that being dispatched relatively early on in this kind of newer era of the Bionicle storytelling, especially because it didn't seem like he was going to be all too relevant to the main conflict that was coming up, which was Velika and his plans for the artificial intelligence beings that were now inhabiting the planet. So I can imagine him getting written off or killed very quickly into this storyline because, quite frankly, there are more interesting stuff to focus on. But I guess with that, we've kind of wrapped up almost all of the dangling plot threads and leftover story serials from Bionicle, and I kind of want to transition this to your wrap-up points, and to wrap up this video as a whole, I'm wondering if you could kind of describe or outline in your mind, where do you think the Bionicle storyline was going to go, and how would it have finally ended if Greg was thinking that far ahead, and how would you have liked to see it end? What do you think?
From what I've seen, I think would have been a really good ending for this whole storyline is, well, you know, Velika loses. You know, he's probably killed, or you know, he's gone in some capacity.
Sure.
And I believe that was what Greg was trying to go for. He was trying to go for the fact that, yeah, Velika is going to be gone. And another thing that was interesting is that there was actually some sort of evidence of where the story could have ended. And if you've read the Samad tales, if you actually read it, there is one part of that story where Samad actually has a vision.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
And in this vision, he was able to see the new Atero on Bota Magna, and that all of the societies have actually integrated with one another, and they were living and they were living peacefully. And this was probably a couple thousand years after the events of the Reformation.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very fascinating. And I also believe that that whole vision was actually a vision of the future. And I feel like that would have been that conclusive ending of, yeah, all of these Clitorians, Agori, they've actually been able to come together and live peacefully in that sense. And also another thing is is Takanova. You know, Takanova eventually was going to have his spotlight in all of this, being a critical point in the Great Being Civil War. And I do feel like that everything that has happened with Takanova, especially during his journey through all the different dimensions, like the kingdom and the Toa Empire universe, I feel like all of that was actually a foreshadowing into what Takanova was ultimately going to do.
Right.
I feel like the kingdom, for example, was basically kind of like a parallel to this new Atero. And I also feel like at the end of everything, Takanova was basically going to transform into a Turaga, and that he was going to help out to lead this new society. And as for the fate of the Toamata, I have tossed things around here and there, but I believe that what was going on with the kingdom, for example, the kingdom was briefly shown by Vizon, and when he visited the kingdom, they were building a spaceship. They were actually building a spaceship to leave the planet. And that's something that I felt like was also a foreshadowing. I felt like when we get to the very end of all of this, the Toamata, they weren't needed on the planet anymore. And I felt like because they were timeless heroes, they were these heroes that had fought through so much. I don't believe that their destiny was really to become a Turaga. I really feel like that the story would have actually went to space. They would have taken a spaceship. They would have left the planet, having fulfilled their destiny of actually, you know, having this society come together and come in peace. And because they were heroes, you know, might as well have them get sent off of the planet and look for new worlds to fight and new worlds to explore, so that they can continue that line of peace and order and justice throughout the whole universe, essentially. And it's also a way to kind of tie in with the G2 storyline, but we don't talk about that too much. But
or they go off and found the hero factory.
Oh yeah, they found the hero factory eventually. But that's how I saw it. That's how I saw it in terms of the ending.
I really like that ending. I think that that's a really solid conclusion to the story, and the best part is, I mean, it leaves it open to new adventures as well. And I think that, I mean, going back to Bionicle's roots as a Lego theme, it's always great to kind of have new adventures be open and potentially new worlds to explore. And I think sending them off to space to kind of both expand their culture and to meet new worlds and whatnot, that's like a galaxy-wide expansion of the story. That's something completely different, and there's a lot of room for even more stories in that universe and for people to even continue on going into what they could have encountered. So I really like the way that you kind of had that in mind, and honestly, I'm sure that that's what Greg was at least trying to build to in some way, shape, or form. But honestly, I think that's a great place to end this video. We're about an hour in, so I think it's about perfect. We're in that you've outlined basically the perfect ending for the Bionicle G1 storyline. I, for one, really, really love this ending. I personally would have accepted it as canon. I would have been totally happy if it ended this way. And I think it's honestly just really fun to kind of toss around ideas and theories as to where exactly this story was going and maybe what would have happened if these story serials continued to essentially being wrapped up. But with that, I think that about sums up this video. Thank you so much, KhingK, for being on as usual.
Thank you so much.
And for the viewers, let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of this proposed ending for Bionicle? Would you have been happy if it ended this way, or do you have your own ideas as to how the story would have ended? Regardless, let me know what you think in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to DuckBricks and KhingK's channel, Imaja Nui Tales, linked in the description below, where he makes a ton of very detailed Bionicle lore videos. So if you were impressed by the knowledge that he showed in this video, definitely be sure to check out his channel. He puts out a ton of great stuff, so I'd highly recommend for you to do that. And so, with that, thank you all so much for tuning into DuckBricks, and stay tuned for even more LEGO and Bionicle news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thank you so much, and bye-bye for now.